Hello, everybody, and welcome to the last evening of the Gotham Storytelling Festival. Gotham for Beginners. This is the second to last show tonight. You are very lucky to be here. There are some amazing people on this show. You are going to get to witness, hear, and experience amazing things. Sit back and relax. Please subscribe. Please like. Please be a patron. Do all the things. Frigid.nyc. All the info is there. If you're here, you already know that. Pass it on to your friends. Thank you for being here tonight. Everybody's happy. Things are good. We still don't have health insurance, and it's 75 degrees, but whatever. Today was a beautiful day. We all celebrated, and yeah, things are looking up. So let's get right into it. I'm going to introduce our first storyteller tonight, Craig Scott, a father of two, originally from Baltimore, because that's how you say it. You don't say Baltimore. If you're from Baltimore, you don't say Baltimore. That's a dead giveaway that you're not from Baltimore. I'm not from Baltimore, but I've been there. Baltimore, Maryland, of course. And currently, Craig resides in High Point, North Carolina. The Carolina is so important to us. He's an actor and an activist, and well, I would say with a very, very unique artistic and political past. This is so exciting. Let's put our hands together and welcome our first storyteller of the evening, Craig Scott. Woohoo!
In my journey as an artist, I can't say my career, as I've never made a living being one. But as an artist whose art is acting, directing, and writing, I would have never believed which way my life would go. For me, art was something very special. First, to understand my relationship with the arts, acting and theater, is best characterized by the aria in Puccini's opera called Tosca, in which Floria sings of living for art. Floria Tosca was a singer who was caught up in a revolution when all she really wanted to do was her art and practice her faith. My art, theater, acting was my faith. I was born and raised in Baltimore City, and I attended public schools. So I couldn't wait for my 16th birthday so that I could drop out. I hated going to school. Probably due to the ridicule that I got because I couldn't afford the fine clothing, or the seeming irrelevance of what I was being taught. Either way, I hated school. It was a torture, to say the least. But one day, while sitting in music class, our music teacher reads an announcement. In this announcement, he says that the Baltimore School for the Arts is having an after-school program in which students will be instructed in all of the various art forms, dance, theater, music, and visual arts. Now, I'd seen multiple 80s TV show called Fame, which was about the School for the Arts in New York. And I'd seen enough of those episodes to know that a School for the Arts was not a regular school. So when I heard this, I said to myself, this is my escape. This is how I'm going to get out of this. So while the teacher was still reading off the announcements, I'm thinking to myself, I don't have any experience or any skills in any of these fields. So I start running off the top of my head my options. Let's see, visual arts. I can't draw or paint worth a damn. What about music? Can't sing. Hell, I can't even play this saxophone I'm supposed to be playing during music class? Dance. Uh, when it comes to dance, I'm like the character on Fame, Leroy. I'm not going to wear tights. Theater, acting. It was the only option left. So this is what I was going to do. So, without any experience, any skills whatsoever in acting, I ran home and I sat down and I wrote what I would later come to find out was something called a monologue. Now, in my monologue, it was going to be about a man who was down on his luck and having a job interview. But the interviewer was going to turn him down for the job, and the man was going to let him have it. I wrote it out, and I decided this is going to be the piece that I'm going to audition with. First, one problem. I have to perform this monologue in front of my mother. Now, if you know anything about most Black mothers during that time, my mother was not going to allow herself to be embarrassed by me having a terrible performance. Wasn't going to happen. So I had to do this thing in front of her. So she sat on her couch, which was a pull-out bed, and I sat on a chair right in front of her. And while sitting on that chair, I performed the most dramatic, serious job interview ever. Now, when I was done, she didn't say much, but I could tell from her reaction I had passed the embarrassment test. So now I was going to be one of the many kids that was going to audition for this after school program. So I go downtown, I go to the school, and they sit me in a lobby right outside the area where the audition is going to be held. And there I met the first student who actually attended the school. She was a funny looking white chick, but she was cool. And she was there in order to help us, relax and be comfortable. She was welcoming us to the Baltimore version of Fame. And she did a pretty good job. I felt comfortable, though I was very nervous. So eventually, my name gets called. So I walk in, and it's this big, beautiful ballroom that they've converted into a theater. So I walk up and I give my name to the panelists at the table. There were two white men and one Black woman. And these people held my academic future in their hands. Frankly, if I was not going to be accepted into this after school program, I was going to drop out. So I performed this audition like my life depended on it. So I did the audition, and I think I did pretty well. And I went home and I waited for several weeks, maybe a couple of months. And eventually the letter came. And in the letter, it said that I was accepted into this after school program. The after school program was called TWIGS, TWIGS. It stood for To Work in Gaining Skills. I live for art. I live for love. This would change my life. I mean, I had a new motivation. I had a reason to now go to school. So when I went to this program, I was surprised that I was actually pretty good at acting. So there I would learn about monologues, scripts, scenes, all sorts of acting exercises. Also there, I would learn about Black playwrights like Amiri Baracus and Athol Fugard. Now, these playwrights, they would incorporate issues and ideas of Black liberation and Black equality into their plays. And here's where I first began to learn that you could express revolutionary ideas in plays and theatrical works. And this would always stick on my mind. So I went through the program and eventually I got into the actual high school. And this would lead me to Boston University's School for the Arts. Now, once I got to Boston, I really got very, very deep into the Black militant movement. In fact, I would help to put together this group. This group was called Muscle, MOSL. It stood for Men of a Stolen Legacy. Now, the name of this group was based on a book. The book was called Stolen Legacy, The Egyptian Origins of Western Philosophy. I believe it was by the author George G.M. James. That's very important, this book. So this group, we would tutor kids on the weekend. We would bring in revolutionary guest speakers like Bobby Seale and Kwame Ture, who was formerly known as Stokely Carmichael. In fact, myself and 3 or 4 other members of Muscle, MOSL, we would get on Boston's train, rail, subway thing that they have, and we would go to a nearby college to listen to a lecture by Kwame Ture. So we get to the college. We walk in, and they're holding the lecture in a gymnasium. The gymnasium is packed full of chairs, and in doing so, they've converted it into like a lecture hall. So Kwame Ture comes out. Oh man, he's this tall, dark, slim man. He's wearing an African dashiki, and when he speaks, he's talking with a West Indian accent, real intense. But when he begins his lecture, a few people in the audience actually get up and they start holding up placards and flags. And most of the flags that were being held up were flags of the Israeli state. So now it's dawning on me like, oh, okay, they are protesting the fact that he's speaking. So I'm thinking to myself, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. It was intense. So after his lecture, myself and the other members, we helped escort him out of the lecture hall, because of the protests and everything. So we escort him into this small room. And while in this small room, this is our chance to speak to our first live and in-person Black revolutionary. And we couldn't wait to tell him about our group. Yeah, Brother Kwame, we started a group called Muscle, Men of a Stolen Legacy. Well, Kwame Ture immediately thought about the book. Oh, yes, I've heard of that book, Stolen Legacy. Have you read it? We start looking around to each other and we realized not a single one of us have taken the time to read the book. We were all embarrassed. Our first meeting with a true revolutionary, and we totally embarrassed ourselves. Never forget it. I was really, really profoundly moved and changed while I was at Boston University also because I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. This got me even deeper into Black militancy. I was also knee deep into the anti-apartheid movement that was going on at the time. In fact, our group provided the security for an anti-apartheid rally that was being held on the campus. During this rally, I would meet an ANC ambassador to the United States. I was very politically active on campus. Unfortunately, the administration got wind of my political activism and they ended my scholarship. So now I'm stuck on Boston University's campus for several months and I'm totally broke. I mean, broke. So broke, I'm resorting to stealing candy bars, Twix candy bars, the peanut butter flavor. They don't even make that flavor anymore. I'm stealing Twix candy bars and boxes of chocolate chip cookies. as my meals. This is my first encounter with true poverty. For the first time, because of my pro-Black stance, I'm paying a serious price. Well, eventually, I would leave Boston and I would return to Baltimore City. And when I returned, I would try to find employment, a job. And I found one. I started working in a law firm as a mail clerk, and I was doing a pretty good job. But then I got laid off. And I get laid off at the same time I'm about to have a child. Now, I'm already angry at a society that I think is very unjust. This was the straw breaker. So I decided that I'm going to begin to use some of the tactics described by my second love, Assata Shakur. She wrote a book called Assata. And in that book, she's describing how a revolutionary cell is organized. She's explaining how money is raised in order to carry out political activities. So I decided from that point, I'm going to use these tactics. And that's when I started robbing banks. And eventually, I would put together a cell of my own. So now the bank robberies would become larger and larger. So now I've got the money to take care of my children and my wife, but I'm also going to use this money to produce my own revolutionary play. So I write and produce a revolutionary play with a very controversial title. The title of my play was, Can a Nigger Do Shakespeare? Very controversial. However, the answer to the question in the title was, no, a nigger can't do Shakespeare, but a Black man can. The play was about revolutionary leaders and heroes like Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey and Martin Luther King. It advocated direct action and retaliation against white supremacist attacks. Very militant, very controversial. And once again, it brought us to the attention of the authorities. So we end up being arrested for the bank robberies. So I was, like Mario in Tosca, imprisoned. And Scarpia wanted me to inform on my friends. And I would not and could not do that. So I would be convicted and sentenced to 52 years, even as a first-time offender. Luckily, I was able to get out after 26 years, but this is what I had to face. While I was imprisoned, I was taken away from my two loves, art and revolution. I lost my family. I lost my future. Being imprisoned for my militant activism vanished all dreams of my love. But I have never loved life so much. Thank you.
Give it up for Craig Scott, everybody. A huge, huge, huge round of applause. Thank you, Craig. That was beautiful. Everybody, you should have seen where and how to follow Craig. If not, Craig Scott, Google him, look him up on Instagram or Twitter or anywhere you care to look him up. That was beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Craig. We're going to keep the show going. We have one more storyteller tonight, our very own, our beloved Jackson Sturkey. Jackson Sturkey is one of the Good Time Charlies. He's a singer and songwriter, cabaret performer from the East Village in New York. He's a friend of Frigid New York. More than a friend, really, currently sitting in the Crane Theater at the bar. I'm so excited to hear his story. He can be found at Pangea, the 10-foot Rap Cabaret? That sounds good too, but no, it's the 10-Foot Rat Cabaret. And his song, A Love Letter to New York, is called A Ghost Light for You, and it's available on Spotify and Bandcamp. So please check that out. You will not be sorry. Yeah, Jackson is glad you're here. We're glad he's here. We're glad you're here. He's glad you're here. I'm glad you're here. We're glad he's here. Everybody's glad everybody's here. Please also give a warm round of applause to Joey behind the scenes, the puppet master pulling all the strings. Woohoo! Frigid New York for putting on this great festival, and to yourselves at home. And now let's welcome the one and only, one of my favorite people, Jackson Sturkey. Mwah! Jackson, take it away.
I never bought into the idea that the devil lived in a house at the bottom of the hill. I couldn't wrap my head around the concept that this is a good man who was tempted by the devil, or that the devil was a fallen angel, or that the devil's greatest trick was tricking humanity that he didn't exist. I think a great trick that Christians play on themselves is convincing themselves that all the evils of the world are the acts of evil men rather than the acts of evil people. The Bible says that the devil prowls around like a lion looking for someone to devour. Well, then the devil must be a hungry, gnashing sort of thing, like the Moloch machine in Metropolis, or like the Moloch of Allen Ginsberg's Howl. My father messaged me and said, "Did you hear about David Myers?" David Myers. David Myers was a Bible teacher at my high school. I went to a private Christian school, which we colloquially called the Academy. I went 7th grade through 12th grade, and I went there as many years as I possibly could. David Myers, I never had him as a teacher, but he was a Bible teacher at the school whose presence loomed large. He worked with the men's soccer team. He worked with the theater program. He was an alumni of the school. You know that hallway that high schools have that have all of the alumni in one picture frame? It looks like a game of Guess Who waiting to start. Well, he's in one of those, and he went to the school during the 1980s and came back to be a Bible teacher. Now, he came from money, like that kind of money that gives you a small loan of $1 million. He lived in a house down at the bottom of the hill that had marble in the entryway, a house that had grounds. I did not come from money. My parents were salt of the earth working class people. My father worked as a firefighter for 35 years and would paint houses on weekends. My mother would babysit and would also stock magazines at grocery stores. I am biracial. My father's black and my mother's white, so I was able to go to the academy on a scholarship. And you'll also find me in one of those Guess Who frames. It was sort of an interesting and strange place to be. An example is we used to sign this covenant. So you have the student handbook. And at the end of the student handbook, on the last page, was the covenant, which you would sign. Now, the covenant basically said that you agree to follow all of the rules of the school. You'll wear the dress code, while smoking, drinking, and immoral relationships were all off limits on or off the school grounds for the entirety of the school year, which really makes you look forward to the summer. And we had this big school assembly where we would turn in all of the slips of paper, like so much kindling for that Moloch machine. You know, we had a lot of strange all-school assemblies. There was the one about abortion, where they passed around these marbles that had fetuses in them. This is your baby at 6 weeks. Passed around. We had the all-school assembly with the about ex-gays. There was the one about the ex-gay who used to be a drug addict, and there was the one about the ex-gay who was the lady in a wheelchair who had taken a vow of celibacy. There was one of the ex-gays who was a pastor's son who had contracted AIDS. And then we had an all-school assembly in 2008 after Obama became president, because one of my classmates had drawn a racist caricature on the board. So we had an all-school assembly to talk about it. On Thursdays, we would have a chapel, and all the men had to wear Oxford shirts with ties, and all of the ladies had to wear skirts. There was a rule in the handbook that said that if a lady was kneeling, if one of the girls who went to school, a student, was kneeling, their skirt had to touch the ground all the way around. A student could be made to kneel to make sure their skirt was the right length. And when it came to those covenants, in particular, signer beware, because anything that was listed in that covenant could be reason for expulsion. Even not signing it was a reason for expulsion. And so you signed it. I signed it. And your parents signed it. And all of the faculty and staff would sign it. And we'd all tear out that last page and put them in that big pile at the center of the gymnasium. I didn't hear the word homosexual until I was in the 7th grade. My first year at the academy. I was in a health class, and we had a substitute teacher in that day. It was a very masculine, bronzered, buzzed-cut woman by the name of Ms. Simpson. And partway through the class, one of my classmates cheekily raised their hand and said, "What about the homosexuals?" And Miss Simpson changed. The weather changed in the room. If she had been a placid sky before, she was suddenly a Category 5 hurricane, and she was screaming about how homosexuality was wrong and how homosexuals were going to a place of eternal punishment, deservedly so. And we all sat there just scared, in a shocked, slightly battered sort of silence, waiting for the bell to ring to tell us that we could go, because this was a nerve. So we sat there waiting for the unexplained anger of adults to pass. Later that day, I went down to the library. Libraries have always been a great source of comfort to me. And so I went down to the library, to the forbidden section of the library, and I got a dictionary, the forbidden section of the library, where you might find Catcher in the Rye and the Harry Potter series. And I got a dictionary. And I remember looking through the dictionary, my page turns were furtive. And I was thinking of other words that began with H, in case anyone asked what I was doing. And then I found the word homosexual. Oh, that's me. I better not be that then. So much of the school's teaching around sexuality was just like abstinence till I die. You could go away on a weekend retreat and get married to Jesus, get a purity ring and pledge your virginity to him. I remember the first thing that happened in my sex education was this lady came in, and she had this tiny handkerchief, and she said, "This is you." And then she took out this comically large lighter, and she said, "This is the flames of passion. This is you when you come into contact with the flames of passion." Went right up, because it was a little piece of flash paper. I didn't know at the time. And so I said, "Do it again." And she said, "You can't." It was like that when it came to sex. Don't do it. Don't do it. When it came to homosexuality in particular, though, the teaching was, it was like this. It's what I can best describe as a doctrine of worthlessness. You see, you are a son or a daughter. You are kind, caring, compassionate. You are someone who tries to be better today than you were yesterday. But none of that matters because of how you love. Not only does none of that matter, but you're going to a place of eternal punishment, deservedly so, because of how you love. And your life? Well, you'll be sad and alone. No one will love you, and then you will die of disease. sometimes imagine David Myers in that environment during the 1980s, during the height of the AIDS epidemic. Young, tousled, scared. No, not scared. Ashamed. Deeply and profoundly ashamed. But none of that matters because of how you love. You know, I didn't even come out to myself till I was 15. Just inside my head, I said to myself, I'm gay. Shit. And I went to a public library and I looked up what is the reconciliation between my religious belief and my sexual orientation. Conversion therapy. The religious rights solution for homosexuality is conversion therapy, which is torture. I'll give you an example. Under the umbrella of conversion therapy, you will find aversion therapy. Say you have something that for you is pornographic, like an underwear ad, or pictures in a book, or pornography. Well, they would take that and they would make a slideshow out of it. And they would make you watch it, and they would give you medicine that would induce nausea. So as you're watching it, you start to associate your sexual arousal with this sick feeling that you're getting. That is aversion therapy, a form of conversion therapy, which is torture. So when I was 15 years old, I decided I was going to have to lie to my family to be part of it. So 1, do not exist. 2, if you do exist, don't get caught. That was high school. When David Myers was 19 years old, he was studying at a Christian college, and then in the summertime working at a Christian summer camp. So even his off time was devoted to God. He ended up, he was studying to be a biblical philosopher. And he did become a biblical philosopher and ended up going back and working at the academy. What a small world. When I was 19 years old, I was studying theater. And I started, a great gift of college is seeing other people experiencing the world in very different ways. And so I decided it was time to come out. Someone should know. Someone should know. I mean, I was 19 and I'd never been kissed, never been on a date. And I thought if there's a time to start living a different sort of life, 19 seems like a very sensible time to do it. I had 3 best friends when I was growing up, and 2 guys and 1 girl. And I decided to come out to my friend who was a girl. And we went to a Steak and Shake. Now I recognize there are places to have serious conversations. Steak and Shake is not one of them. It's not a place you go. It's like an IHOP or a Denny's. It's a place you end up. So anyway, we're there at the Steak and Shake, and we finish our meal, and I tell her. And she gets up from the table and leaves. And never talks to me again. Confirming every fear that I have about coming out of the closet. A year later, I have the opportunity to study at a musical theater conservatory in New York City. And I do. I see something when I'm there studying in New York that I had never seen before. I see an older gay man who is happy and well-adjusted and living the dream of working on Broadway. I see a few of them. But this flies in the face of the doctrine that I've been taught. So I go back home to where I'm staying. I'm not home, but I go back to the apartment where I'm staying, and I start reading through the Bible. I read the entire thing from in the beginning, God, may the grace of your Lord Jesus Christ be upon you, amen. And by the time I get to the end of that reading, I think to myself, I don't believe this. As a matter of fact, there's more of this that I disagree with than agree with. And so over the course of the next year, I become an atheist. And like many a young atheist, I post about it on Facebook. No, I haven't. As I said earlier, I did not have David Myers as a teacher, and this is the only interaction that I ever had with him. So I posted to Facebook about atheism and my thoughts about this whole thing, and he slides into my DMs and says, "Hey, guy, what are you doing?" And we started this conversation that lasts about 3 months, um, and it's so good to be able to actually discuss the issues that I have with Christianity about someone who is a biblical philosopher, someone who really knows what they're talking about. But after about the 3 months, we get to a point where maybe it's the way we interpret scripture is too different, maybe it's our world views are too different, but the conversation can't go anywhere. Also, I had been showing our correspondence to a friend of mine and getting their 2 cents on the whole thing. And when he found out about that and became mad, he became really angry, which was fair. I mean, he thought that we were communicating in confidence. We were not. But also, he had something to hide. I did not. Now, I don't know if all truths are going to have light shown upon them, but here's the truth. I didn't think of David Myers for years. I graduated college with my degree in musical theater performance. I came out to my parents. We disconnected. I moved to New York City. I got into a series of bad, good, mediocre relationships. I became a cabaret performer in the East Village. I'm singing still. And I reconnected with my parents. Bad. It's good. It's rough. Progress isn't linear. You know, I left in Ohio a lot of those small world ideas. I know people who never went 30 miles from where they were born. And so when my father said to me, "Did you hear about David Myers?" I said, "No, I did not." And he said to me, "David Myers has been arrested for soliciting sex from a 15-year-old boy who turned out to be 3 cops in a trench coat." It shook up his world. It shook up the world of the academy. There was one alumni who posted, who started a Facebook group, and people started posting different stories of abuses that had taken place at the academy, misogyny, homophobia, racism, bullying. Even a few people shared their stories of interactions that they had with David Myers. And there was one story in particular that really shook me up. Like when I started reading it, I started shaking and crying. It was a dress code thing. There was this young lady, woman now, who had been made to kneel to check the length of her skirt. Normally, a teacher might take a student into the hallway to make them kneel, but this teacher had her kneel in front of the entire classroom. I started shaking and crying when I read that because I was in that room and I see myself sitting there in hindsight and I want to scream at myself and say, "Do something, say something." But then I have to remember that I was a kid. I was a child. I was a kid. I was a child. I'm still in this conversation with myself, trying to forgive the child that I was for not knowing any better. There were a few reactions to the David Myers situation. Yes, there was the Facebook group. All of us realizing that we weren't as alone as we thought we were. There was some people who said, "David Myers is the devil and he lives in that house at the bottom of the hill, hiding away from consequences." Other people said, "But David Myers is a good man who was tempted by the devil." And I mean, aren't we all just good people tempted by the devil? How about this? Whichever one of us has no sins should throw the first stone. If I saw someone post something like that to Facebook, I would slide into the comments section and say, "You're defending a pedophile." And they were. And I couldn't wrap my head around it until I realized that predators don't only groom the victim. They will groom families. They will groom businesses. They will groom churches and church communities. And there was a large portion of the church community, of the religious community in the area, who came to his defense. Alumni, former co-workers, who came to his defense and saying things like, it must be fine for my son to go to his house for the men's soccer team retreat. I mean, iron sharpens iron. It must be fine for him to have a one-on-one coaching session with him for the theater, because other people's sons have done it. It must be fine. It's gross. It's insidious. It's evil. But I don't want to lay this all at the feet of David Myers. No. The Academy bears some responsibility here, too. Do you remember those covenants we were made to sign? Well, there's a clause in the covenant that says that if you come into conflict with a teacher or faculty member, that you will not sue the school. Instead, you will go to Christian mediation. And if you cannot decide a company to do Christian mediation with, then you will go with the one that the school has previously chosen. The national organization that has worked with how many schools? With how many churches? How many victims has the Academy co-signed on? With the devil they know, David Myers. How many David Myerses are there? This is something that I think we must continue to unpack. It's a microcosm of a much larger universe. Because you see, you spent years thinking that you're alone and that you're hurting this and no one else is. You are, but there's nothing wrong with you. That light goes on. You realize you're standing in a room full of people who have dealt with something similar to this. They were there in that soil, that sick soil that told you that you were born sick and should be well. They are part of that environment that said that you're like the Frankenstein monster, made this way and hated by your creator for it. But if God is perfect and his plan is perfect, then exactly how I am and where I am and who I am is part of his perfect plan. So you don't have any issue with me. You have an issue with the one who created me. And you should have an issue with the Academy, that a place where you are discriminated against as a rule, not as the exception. And us, children, being fed into that Moloch machine. Thank you for listening.
Give it up for Jackson Sturkey, everybody. Jackson Sturkey, thank you for that amazing story. Straight from the heart. Wow, we are so lucky to have witnessed such amazing storytellers tonight. That was our show. That was the Gotham Storytelling Festival, Gotham for Beginners. Please, a very, very, very warm round of applause for Craig Scott and Jackson Sturkey. Please find them online. Please message them. Please compliment them. Please tell them how much you loved what they shared with you tonight. There is the final show of the Gotham Storytelling Festival coming up at 8 p.m. tonight, right here. And there are some amazing performers on that one too. Yes, I have not addressed the fact that I'm sitting in front of a prize wheel. I'm not doing that because Alex Trebek died today, which is very sad. This is my husband. I've married this wheel, and right, that's 2020. Anyway, the storytellers on the next show are Vernon Payne, Adam Barth, and Martin Dockery. Amazing people, amazing storytellers. Please don't miss it. Tune in at 8 p.m. Thank you for being here tonight. I was your host, Lucy Pohl. Please give it up for Joey behind the scenes, pulling all the strings. Please give it up for Arez, the Grand Master of Frigid New York. Give it up for Craig Scott and Jackson Sturkey. Give it up for yourselves. Thank you for being here. Happiness and joy. Mwah. We love you. Good night.